Distinguished participants, and I would like to welcome you and to say that today is not just a celebration of 23 years of Adonis and Abe. We see it more as a celebration of African scholarship because for over 2 decades, we have been trying our best not just to help in amplifying African voices in the bibliometric economy, but also in helping to call attention to the continent's contributions in knowledge production, knowledge distribution, and knowledge exchange. In doing this, however, we consciously decided not to play the victim or to plea for African exceptionalism because we believe there is something called global standards. But to call attention to the fact that the global yardsticks for measuring academic excellence, as important as they may be, could sometimes overlook important unique contexts, social impacts, and grassroots innovations that are emanating from the continent. So, given the above, we feel there's no better way to mark this milestone of our turning 23 years. We actually started on the 18th of March, 2003, just a day after my birthday in the United Kingdom. So, given the above objectives we've set for ourselves, we feel there's no better way to mark our 23rd anniversary than to confront a topic that strikes at the heart of the continent's future, which is African universities in world university ranking. I mean, increasingly, it's become a very topical issue in the academia. So in recent world university rankings for 2025 and 2026, for example, we see that African universities showed a mixture of growing participation and significant regional leadership, primarily driven by South Africa and Egypt. While the number of ranked institutions has increased, many established universities face pressure from global competition and funding challenges. Some African universities have also joined others from the global north in questioning the relevance of the whole ranking system. Some have also criticized aspects of the ranking system, while others raise questions of whether the whole ranking system, in fact, could intentionally or unintentionally reinforce what we call coloniality in African education. We have assembled very distinguished scholars to help us unpack the issues in this conversation, not just to unpack them, but to interrogate them. So I will just mention our guest speakers, and then when Professor Nwafo takes over, as he's going to do very shortly, he will give us a little more of the resume of each of the speakers. The first speaker in the sessions will be Professor Olushola Oyewole. He is the Secretary General of the Association of African Universities based in Ghana. And he was also a former Vice Chancellor of the Federal University of Agriculture at Abeokuta. He's going to try to answer the question of what the world university rankings, what do they really mean to the African universities? And then we have Professor David Johnson, who is a university reader in comparative and international education and professorial fellow of St. Anthony's College, Oxford University, United Kingdom, and he will speak on outreaching rankings. We have also Dr. Peter J. Wells, who is the head of education for Southern Africa at UNESCO's office in Harare, Zimbabwe. He was a former chief of global higher education at UNESCO Paris. where he helped to draft the text of the Africa,
read my report.
text of the Addis Ababa Convention
Okay.
for Africa,
So what is the
the Buenos Aires Convention
I do not follow the
for
law
Latin
agenda.
America and the Caribbean,
Then you can read my report. Showing.
and the revised convention for the Arab states.
Okay.
He will speak on avoiding the rankings rabbit hole. He says, know yourself, know your context, and know where your own worrying of higher education is leading. Then we have Professor Six McKenna, who is Professor of Higher Education Research at Rhodes University in South Africa, and a very leading voice in the whole idea of reimagining the purpose of higher education, with a special focus on what they call epistemic justice. And this is the whole question of whose knowledge is valued and who gets access to it. And Professor McKenna will speak on game playing and universality ranking. So we have tried to assemble speakers to cover most of the aspects of the conversation, around university rankings. I'll now hand over to our moderator, Professor Anthony Wanfo, who is a professor of law at National University of Lesotho and editor-in-chief of one of our quite influential journals and Scopus Indexed, African Journal of Law and Justice System. Professor Wanfo, I'm happy to hand over to you from here so that I can take a back seat and sip my tea or water while listening to the to the contributions. Thank you very much. Let me just say we already have 98. Yeah?
Well, just expressing my gratitude
Okay.
to Professor Adibe. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I'm just saying there are already 99 people in the room. 99 people in the room. And I'm sure more people are going to join. I'll mute myself now.
Thank you, Prof. I believe that before I finish talking, before the first speaker starts, the number would have been over 100. Yes. Yes, thank you, Professor Adibe, for bringing us together again today. As you've always done, last year, we also had the opportunity to talk on another topical issue, which has to do with the ranking of the African journals. And today we're going to be dealing with the ranking of African universities. And the host has assembled the best minds, high intellectual, people with very high intellectual foundations, and institutional administrators that will be discussing these topics, not just from their own research, but from their own practiced experience from the various institutions where they have worked or are still working. So the guidelines for today's engagement is that each speaker will be given 15 minutes to speak on the topic they have chosen. And after all the speakers have spoken, then the audience will have opportunity to ask questions. The questions could be typed on the chat box. It could be addressed to the speakers individually or collectively, as it were. If time permits, the audience could also be allowed to make comments openly on the system. But if time does not allow, then the questions they typed will be read out and we'll deal with them as the questions come up. So the first on my list here, in no order of seniority, is Professor Olushola Oyewole. Already, Professor Adibe has given us his background, but for the avoidance of doubt, let me also reiterate some of the things he said about Professor Oyewole. Professor Oyewole will be talking on the topic, what the world university rankings mean to the African universities. Professor Oyewole's brief resume as follows. He was a Secretary General of he is the Secretary General of the African Association, the Secretary General of the Association of African Universities based in Ghana, and a former Vice Chancellor of the Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta, Nigeria. He has held senior advisory positions at the African Union Commission, Quality Assurance and Scholarships, and worked with global bodies like UNESCO and the OECD. His intervention will try to provide answers to such questions as what accounts for regional and country disparities in these rankings? What benefits and challenges accrue to the universities that make it into the rankings? What must African universities do to make it into these rankings or improve on their rankings? Professor Oyewole, the platform is yours. Thank you.
Very much, Professor Wafo. Let me congratulate Professor Adibe for this anniversary. Good day, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to speak on the topic, what the World University Ranking means to African universities. Global university ranking have become one of the most powerful forces shaping higher education today. They influence where students study, where scholars work, and where funding flows. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa has a challenge. With over 1,200 universities and immense intellectual capacity, we have a problem. Why is Africa underrepresented in the global ranking system? This is a paradox we must all confront. Let me share you the purpose of my address today. Firstly, why the disparities exist. What are the causes? Secondly, I'll be looking at what ranking means for African universities. And thirdly, what must be done by African universities to improve their positions in world ranking. The most influential ranking system today include Times Higher Education, KS ranking, and the Shanghai ranking. These systems shape global perceptions of quality. I hope that is really correct. Ladies and gentlemen, what are the things that ranking measures? They assess research outputs, citations, teaching, international outlook, industry income, and reputations. Ordinarily, these indicators appear neutral, but they are not entirely so. I need to say this very critically to say that ranking rewards systems, not just institutions. They favor environments where the research ecosystem are already strong. So the issue of countries, the issue of continent does not matter. Look at our own situation in Africa. Africa today accounts for less than 3% of ranked universities globally. What is the reason? It's because data about African universities are not easily available. And then this underrepresentation reflects deeper structural realities in our ranking position. But in Africa, within Africa, there are few countries dominating ranking, notably South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, Nigeria, and Kenya. And there are some key insights that we need to note. The countries with stronger representation typically have one, better research funding, they have strong doctoral training, and they have robust global cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, one question that many of us in Africa ask is this: why disparities? Why is it that universities in Africa are not ranking well in the world ranking system? That's number one is research funding. Countries that do well in ranking invest about 2 to 4% of their GDP on research and development. Unfortunately, for many countries in Africa, we invest below 0.5%. And the implication of this low investment is that we have limited research infrastructures, reduced research outputs, and lower global competitiveness. And this is affecting our ranking. Number two, is the research outputs in many universities in Africa. The limited funding leads to lower research outputs and therefore fewer publications. But without strong research outputs, ranking remains out of reach to many universities in Africa. The third cause, ladies and gentlemen, is our citation impact, the impact of the research we do. Today, when research is produced in Africa, our visibility is limited. Many of our journals are not indexed globally, and the fact is this: we have weak citation networks. Ladies and gentlemen, number 4 reason why many universities in Africa are not highly ranked can be connected to ranking, to internationalization. Rankings reward international presence. However, for many universities in Africa, we are not able to attract international students. We don't even attract sufficient global faculties, probably because we cannot fund them. And the constraint is so clear. Funding is a challenge to many universities in Africa. Visa policies restricting the movement of academicians into our countries is a big problem affecting many of us in Africa. And I need to say this, ladies and gentlemen, reputation matters in ranking. It matters significantly. Institutions like University of Oxford or Harvard University, they benefit from decades of recognition, and this makes it favorable for them in the ranking system. Let me put this systematic reality before all of us. The key issue is not lack of talent in Africa. Africa is highly endowed. The problem with Africa, the challenge in Africa, is the structure within which African universities operate. And this needs to be taken into consideration by all of us. Let us compare ourselves with some Asian countries. 30 years ago, many Asian universities were not globally visible. That's what we have today. But today, these Asian universities dominate top rankings. What is their secret? Examples like Singapore University, Peking University, National University of Singapore, they are not only ones in the world university system to what they were 30 years ago. But the Asian university succeeding. Ladies and gentlemen, their rise was driven by deliberate strategy, strong investments, and long-term planning. And I believe that those of us in Africa, we have some lessons to learn from them. What are these lessons? Ladies and gentlemen, rankings respond to strategy. Ranking respond to investment in research. Investment matters. And for you to be highly ranked, research must be prioritized. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not that Africa is so low. We have some African success story, and one of them is the University of Cape Town, a university that demonstrates that what is possible with strong research structure and global collaboration. We need to learn from the examples of the University of Cape Town. Not this alone. We also have examples like University of Witwatersrand and University of Stellenbosch University. Their strength is research focus, international networks, and strategic leadership. Why am I bringing this good ranking university in this presentation? The takeaway is this: excellence already exists in Africa. The challenge is, how can we scale up this excellence that is Africa to universities across Africa? Ranking is good. It has some benefits. Ladies and gentlemen, ranking brings visibility. Ranking gives funding to universities that are highly ranked. It promotes international partnership. And it also attracts talents to these universities. Beloved, these benefits can create a powerful cycle of growth for academic development in our various universities. The message I'm passing across is this: better ranking attracts resources, and these resources improve the university system further. So ranking is good for our university system. So universities in Africa should be encouraged to be visible, to rank well in our system. But the challenges is this: when we are asking universities in Africa to improve themselves to rank well, we should note that there are some challenges in ranking. We should not miss our priorities because we want to be highly ranked. We should not misplace our priorities. We should not put ourselves under unnecessary financial structures because we want to be highly ranked. You should also mention that universities in Africa must not sacrifice local relevance but their national development rates because they want to be highly ranked. There are some strategies that we need to commit ourselves to. If we want universities in Africa to be highly ranked, we need to strengthen our research capacity. We need to expand our PhD programs. We need to improve the quality of our publications. And after universities, we need to invest in infrastructure. We also need to increase our global engagement through international collaboration. Not even talking about North-South collaboration. Let us build collaboration. We need to build international research networks. We also need to improve our research visibility. This will help us to be better ranked. And we also mentioned the leadership policy are very important. Leadership and supportive national policies are essentials that our universities and countries need to commit ourselves to. Success requires alignment between institutions and our governments. What is the way forward? Ladies and gentlemen, for universities in Africa to be highly ranked, we need to build strong research-oriented universities, design a good training program, invest in research, international collaboration, for research visibility, introduce incentive for research productivity, the in South Africa. We need to promote interdisciplinary research. We need to see what we can do to attract global academic talent. We're improving the standards we build on our researchers. We need to strengthen governance and leadership, and we need to align policies with university excellence. I believe that actions like this require collaborations between governments, universities, and international organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, let me leave us with this closing remark. The question is not whether universities can work in global ranking. The question is what Africa is ready to invest in the systems that produce world-class universities. When this happens, we will assure you we rank well in the world ranking system. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
So much, Prof. Yes, we've all heard it from someone who had been involved in the university administration over the years. We've had what makes a university ranked at a particular level. We now know that one of the requirements is the resources available to the university, the research funding available to the university. And that's not surprising because in the recent QS ranking that was released among the African universities, you see that about the top 10 ranked universities are from South Africa. I was trying to find out from Prof. Probably is going to come as one of the questions. Where was his own university ranked, or where is the place of his own university in the African ranking? That's the University of Agriculture. He's going to talk to that during the questions. And then he will tell us why it's not featuring among the top universities in Africa. And this obviously relates to what we dealt with last year about the ranking of our journals, because the ranking of our journals also goes to the ranking of our universities that we dealt with last year. Well, without saying more on this, let me leave it until the comments and questions begin to come up. Let's go to the second speaker. The second speaker is Professor David Johnson. David Johnson will be talking on the topic outreaching rankings. David Johnson's brief resume is that he's a university reader in comparative and international education, a professorial fellow at St. Anthony's College, Oxford, United Kingdom. Professor Johnson has worked on several assignments for the World Bank and UNICEF across many countries in Africa, including Nigeria, Sudan, and Somalia. He is the founder of a new University of Oxford social impact spin-out company, Oxtrack, designed to assess and support the professional capabilities of African teachers. His intervention interrogates the idea of university in Africa, the nature of knowledge, and the meaning of scientific endeavor in a rapidly changing world. Professor Johnson, the platform is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. I don't recognize myself from anything you've read. I used to get my golden retriever to mark my student essays, but thanks for that nonetheless. I'm having a little bit of difficulty sharing my screen. I've sent some slides to Professor Dive and to P. Secor. I don't know if you received that. Would you be able to share them, do you think? I'll start just by while that's being shared, I hope it can be, just by giving a short abstract to my talk. The cheeky title of Outreaching Rankings. African universities remain underrepresented in global rankings that privilege research output and citation impact, international prestige. These metrics inadequately capture the development missions of African higher education institutions. This paper advances the concept of outreaching rankings as an alternative evaluative framework centered on societal impact, innovation, and economic transformation. It argues that a critical indicator of such outreach is the capacity of universities, amongst other things, to generate innovative companies, spin-out companies particularly, that translate knowledge into scalable social and financial value. And Professor Ayawole, who went before me, has already mentioned, really quite significant work in spin-out companies at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, the University of Wits, certainly Egypt, and so on. And I think this is perhaps where things might have shifted to. It's very clear with investments going into higher education in countries like China, for example, which is an interesting development model for Africa. Just a year or two ago, three quite successful universities, Renmin being one of them, and two others, despite support by the Chinese government to boost their international places and rankings. They were already quite significantly ranked, decided just to withdraw from the ranking system altogether and concentrate on China's national mission. So the paper argues that critical indicators such as outreach is the capacity of universities to generate spin-out companies. I'll talk a little bit about what spin-out companies do. How do we, for example, inculcate and develop innovation? How do we hothouse it? How do we show what African universities are capable of through, absolute leadership in product design, in solution design, in innovations that make an impact and a difference. So the paper concludes that the future of African higher education lies not in replicating global ranking models, but in building entrepreneurial universities with the gentlest emphasis on entrepreneurship, embedded in local and regional development systems. And you would expect me to say with the most gentle emphasis on entrepreneurialism, being in Oxford where we value almost above anything else disciplinary knowledge, the idea of ideas. We protect and have done fiercely for 800 years or more the idea of blue skies thinking, of allowing historians to do history and to go about their business in dusty libraries with their white coats on and protect them fiercely. It is not a proposed shift to what some people call mode one knowledge production, in which everything we do has to have an instrumental value and that links to industry or government necessarily. So, we are defenders of the idea that blue skies thinking, but blue skies thinking that allows us to anticipate and think beyond the obvious, to anticipate things that are known, but also the unknown unknowns. As I think with the University of Oxford, the spin out with AstraZeneca in the dark days of deaths all across the globe from COVID, the ability to act very quickly to a pandemic that nobody knew its shape, but certainly for our colleagues in Oxford, they knew that it was coming. So the ability to predict the unknown and to deal with it when its shape and form becomes clear. But not so much the sadness. I mean, I suppose the sadness of it is that in Africa, many variants were beginning to emerge, and there were so many of our young scientists, our young biologists, who similarly were able to see, around the corner, as it were. And they had the knowledge, they had absolutely the skill to develop vaccines for new variants, who could easily have spun out new treatments and so on, but just didn't have the laboratory facilities and the other capabilities with which to do so. So it's not so much a question of lacking in knowledge or having to catch up with others, because I think we have that in abundance, but we just don't always have the ability to translate what we know, what we're good at, what we're capable of in African universities into products and ideas, propositions, hypotheses, thinking, blue skies or otherwise, that is capable of changing the world. So, in the absence of my slides perhaps not having arrived, or do you think you might have been able to find them? I'll just plow on. I don't want to take up too much time. So, over the last 2 decades, global rankings have become a dominant mechanism for evaluating institutional quality. And I think we've heard from Professor Ayewole a lot of these examples published in the Times Higher Ed and academic rankings of universities and so on. And within these rankings, it shows that African universities are largely peripheral. But I think both Professor Ayewole and I challenge the idea that African universities are peripheral. The fact that we don't make it into the rankings in the way that these publications show us. is not a deficit in the capacity of African universities to innovate or think or produce high quality papers and so on. But there is a misalignment between these ranking criteria and the institutional purpose. Historically, we know, whether we look at Kenya or whether we look at Zimbabwe, look at South Africa, Tanzania, anywhere, African countries, as countries elsewhere in the world, have had to fight really important battles to achieve independence, to expand their universities, from one university in Zimbabwe against a lot of argument from the World Bank, for example, in the 1980s, that higher education is not as important as primary education, and so on. So establishing the idea of a university in the first place, and then looking at establishing its vision and mission, has been an enormous task for African universities. And those problems that were experienced then are problems we still have today. There's a lot of pressure on African universities to um, to make good on the vision that we have for them. So expanding access to mass higher education, producing skilled graduates for national development, addressing pressing societal challenges. Universities are often drawn into the front line, and its academics have to engage very quickly in what I call policy firefighting activities, trying to address crises as they pop up here, there, and everywhere in absolute rapid regularity. And these distract from the quiet time that academics need to produce thoughtful papers, to submit to journals, to which now many have to pay for. There's some interesting articles of new forms of collaborations and alliances between African academics and those in the Middle East, for example. And these alliances are to do with Professor. Now, why are you signaling that my time is up? Are you waving or saying that I've got 5 minutes or so? Thanks. These alliances are producing, interesting variants to what is published, what means and mechanisms are used. There's a lot of new debates and new challenges for academics in Africa. So really, I suppose in the last few minutes that I had, the paper argues that this new evaluative paradigm, the idea of outreaching rankings, we should really be able to find a way of measuring the success of African universities by its output of innovation, technology, thinking about and treating problems as they emerge, those of a social kind, those of an economic kind, those of a cultural kind, and so on. So really to translate our essentially intellectual property, our knowledge of certain things, into things that are able to function in simple but meaningful ways in the societies in which we live. Global rankings are typically built on relatively narrow epistemologies of excellence: research volume, citation indices, international faculty student ratios, international reputation surveys, and research income, and all the rest. But we do need something different. We need to be able to ask a different question, rather than asking the question, and these are my final thoughts, how does this university compare globally? We should begin to ask the question, what difference does this university make to its society? And this approach aligns better with more broader intellectual traditions, including the engaged university model, human development frameworks, but more recently, innovation systems theories. And outreach in this sense is not limited to community service. Many people see African universities as talking only about community service, but encompasses the translation of knowledge into action through public policy influence, technological innovation, and enterprise creation. And I shall end there before Professor Noivor gets very cross with me. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Prof. I don't usually like interrupting professors when they talk, but sometimes it becomes inevitable because if you allow professors to talk, they can talk from now till tomorrow, they will not stop. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. We got all the points you made. You reaffirmed the position of Professor Yewole on the African University ranking. You accepted that in Africa, we have the talents, we have the skills. All we need is to harness it and make sure that we produce the right outputs. And our universities will enjoy the right places in the world ranking. We'll leave it at that for now. Let's go to the next presenter. Thank you so much, Prof. We appreciate your input. Yes, the next presenter here is Dr. Peter Wells. Dr. Peter Wells is going to be talking on the topic, avoiding the rankings rabbit hole. Know yourself, know your context, know where your own warring of higher education is leading. Dr. Peter Wells is the head of education for Southern Africa at UNESCO's office in Harare, Zimbabwe, and former chief of global higher education at UNESCO, Paris, where he drafted the text of the Addis Ababa Convention for Africa, the Buenos Aires Convention for Latin America and the Caribbean, and the revised convention for the Arab states, each of which has quality assurance and university cooperation in teaching and research as a foundation. He is the author of policy papers, articles, and monographs on topics of higher education reforms, quality assurance and internationalization, digital transformation, university rankings, and equity and inclusion in national higher education systems. Dr. Wells, the platform is yours. You're welcome. 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Just checking, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear, Prof. Doc.
Excellent.
Sorry.
I don't have a PowerPoint, so I'm just going to make a few comments and I will stick to the 15 minutes, I assure you. What I would really like to, when I proposed that topic, I was probably a bit ambitious, but some of the things I'd just like to relay from a global perspective and maybe the African context too, have already been covered by David and Professor Olusal. And maybe the first comment I would like to say is this. There are now globally, officially, 21,000 officially recognized higher education institutions. And that doesn't count a lot more online virtual institutions. So any ranking, be it global, be it global Shanghai ranking, Times Higher Education ranking, African continent ranking, Asia ranking, will never, ever include every institution. And institutions that are doing a very, very good job. The Times Higher Education 500, by definition, cannot include every institution. The Shanghai ranking, I think it's 1,000, and maybe they've moved it to 1,500. These rankings have been going on for getting towards 50 years. They started in the US with the US World News ranking in the 80s. In the 90s, we got the Times Higher Education. In 2003-04, we got the Shanghai ranking. But that has never disputed the fact that there are other institutions doing a very good job. And I think that's something that we need to, in the African context where I am now and what we're talking about here, we need to keep that in mind, that making ourselves or driving ourselves into a university ranking system is the rabbit hole I'm talking about. It's not the be-all and end-all of everything. Now, at the same time, and where are we now? 2026. In 2012, UNESCO published a volume on the uses and misuses of university rankings in higher education. And I will put the link to that document or that volume in the chat. And the title is very important, the uses and misuses. And the uses are, depending on the system, depending on the country, can be valuable. But misusing rankings as a guide to how universities should develop, evolve, consider their quality and consider their role in societies is the misuse of it. So I would contest that I know this discussion is about improving universities in Africa's featuring, if I can put it that way, in global rankings. I really think that's a red herring and not something that should be the center of the discussion. Turning to the uses of rankings, or let me say the value of them. What I have seen over the last 20 years globally, not just in Africa, is that what the rankings have done is made institutions or higher education systems look at what they consider to be good quality provision within their national context, or maybe regional context as well. And I've heard lots of complaints from, why is this institution not in the list? Why is this one in and shouldn't be in? And a lot of that comes down to not only what the institution strives to be, but also the data they have. Now, just last week, I was at a conference for SADC, which is the Southern African Development Community within Africa, where we were talking about HEMIS data and how there is very little data collected by institutions, universities, higher education, tertiary sector, and therefore translated into systemic system data. And this really does speak to, I believe, the fundamental problem of why institutions are not necessarily appearing in ranking systems. Again, I'm not in favor of ranking it in any sense, but if there is no data being collected on, for example, graduate completion rates, graduate employment data, graduate enrollment data, or transition from high school to university, and where these students and graduates go, or there is no data collected on the research impact, the research outputs, as Professor David spoke about, then I'm afraid even with the best will in the world, universities in Africa will never appear on any global ranking or Africa continental rankings or even national ranking surveys. So I think there is a big issue here on data collection. I cannot tell you how good my university is if I haven't got the data to prove it. And so I think that's a crucial thing. But I will I'll circle back to the point where it's not about being in any ranking orders, be they global, be they continental or national. It's about the institutions themselves, and they can be very small. They don't have to be the big ones. They could be in South Africa or Egypt or the UK or Canada or Australia. That's not the point. It's about having an institution that works for the community it serves. And that community could be very small, it could be in a province, it could be nationally, or it could be continental, or it could be global. I know Professor Ulasola talked about bringing international scholars, international researchers to the continent, and vice versa. They go out and providing scholars globally, but I don't think that's really the crux of the matter. I think we need to look at making higher education, maybe tertiary, if you want to call it that, and I include TVET colleges, post-secondary with that serve a community purpose. And they help with national development strategies, continental strategies, if that's the vision of the institution. So the vision and the outreach and the purpose of that institution needs to be the guiding force, not at all about getting an institution or a system of institutions, if you want to broaden it, into any global list, which will by definition only include 500 to 1,000 institutions. I think that's a misnomer. One other thing, there was a mention previously, and maybe this is more the Q&A, but it's linked. The discussion I've heard already, and it's true, that getting into a rankings list, a global list, often depends on resources. And it's true. Resources in terms of facilities, on attracting scholars, providing scholarships for students, and that's true. But it's not just about resources, it's about, or resource volume. It's, in my view, it's about using the limited resources we have at an institution to make the best of what we have. And again, that comes back to, it's what does the institution want to do? Know yourself, know your context, know how you can make an impact at the institutional level for the better of the communities you serve, the wider national, maybe national or international. I've said this, like I said, I've been talking about rankings for way too long. They've been around for decades now, and they are not something to be, for an institution or a system to be beholden to. And I'll say this, it's not, do not compete, be unique. And the rankings push everybody into a competitive environment. That's not the purpose, in my view, of the public good or the role and the purpose of a higher education system. I've talked too long without any slides and bored everybody senseless, so I will stop there. Back to you, Anthony.
Thank you so much, Doc. Yes, you seem to have thrown the previous speakers under the bus. Prof doesn't believe in a ranking at all. Yes, with more than 21,000 universities all over the world, where do you start the ranking? So universities should have impact on their communities, not necessarily where they are placed. According to him, those things are done arbitrarily. And we hear all this murmuring along the academic corridors. Each time we get all these rankings from the ranking bodies, you hear people saying one thing or the other. I know some institutions have even threatened to pull out from the ranking completely because they believe that the metric is not fair and there is no way you can justify the basis upon which one is placed above the other on this ranking. Prof, I'm sure you have supporters on this. Thank you. Perhaps myself might be one of your supporters. Thank you so much. Yes, the next presenter is Professor Sue McKenna. Professor McKenna will be talking on game playing and universality ranking. Professor McKenna is a leading voice in reimagining the purpose of higher education with special focus on epistemic justice, the question of whose knowledge is valued and who gets access to it. She is Professor of Higher Education Research at Rhodes University in South Africa. Professor McKenna's intervention will critically examine the various controversies surrounding the world university ranking. Prof. McKenna, the platform is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And a big thank you for the invitation to be here with you today. I really appreciate it. I'm not sure, just to pick up on what you just said, Anthony, that in fact, Peter did throw the other speakers under the bus, so to speak, because there is a common thread of a little bit of skepticism across all three. I'm going to come in with outright rejection of the rankings, but I think we did hear some skepticism across the previous three speakers, and I want to start off, because I'm going to come out with a very strong view against rankings. I want to start off by at least giving a few provisos. I want to totally agree with Peter Wells that are we collecting data that allows us to evaluate ourselves? Have we actually got a strong system of knowing where we are at? Because if we set our own agenda, how do we know how we're doing on that agenda if we ourselves are not even collecting our data around student enrollment or throughput or publications, or be it what it will? And I also want to totally agree with Olusola Oyewole, who said, you know, we need to build our research and we need to make sure that that research is readily accessible, identifiable, and therefore that we can make an impact on the global stage. And I totally agree with that. I think we should be doing it for other reasons than rankings. But I think that we can all agree that that's something we should be investing time and money in. And of course, I totally agree with everything David Johnson said. And I especially want to say that I love this idea of outreaching and the play on that word. And I think I'm going to definitely draw on that in the future. But as I said, my research is very critical of university rankings. And so I'm just going to present a little bit on why I and many others take the position that we do. So basically, my argument in this short time, I'm going to be showing how rankings are unscientific, how they are neo-colonial, how the business model is at times actually possibly not even legal, but certainly dodgy. And then I'm going to hopefully talk about, if you really want to go for rankings, I can tell you how to do well in rankings, because there are games being played all over the place. So if you're really just seeking the numbers, you can get the numbers. So firstly, and I'm not going to spend time on this because there's so much research on this, but why do we, myself and many others, say that rankings are unscientific? Well, firstly, because it takes complex social phenomena of a university, which does all sorts of different activities, and different universities may value different activities. And instead, it says these are the activities that we're going to look at. And almost all of the rankings prioritize research, some almost exclusively only looking at research. So that's one problem. But then it doesn't just look at research in its complexity. It says we need to turn this complexity of research into a number. And so we are taking a proxy measure, and some of those measures are very far away from the thing that they purport to measure. So in the end, the number of publications, does that tell you that the publications make any difference? Does it tell you they have impact? It doesn't really matter. We don't care what you publish, where you publish, just get the publications, because that's what counts. So there are other proxy measures which are even further away, but the first problem is proxy measures. The second problem is that we then averaging together, the rankings industry averages together these various numbers of student to staff, numbers of peer review, numbers of publications. Those things are unrelated, and anyone who's taught a research methods course, that that's the first thing we teach even at undergraduate level, is that you shouldn't be doing composite averaging of numbers that bear no relationship to each other, because adding apples to pears tells you nothing about either. Then the weighting is arbitrary. So if we decide that the research should be worth 60%, we'll have one order of universities. If we change that to 70%, the order will change. But presumably the quality of those universities hasn't changed. So it's a fairly arbitrary measure in the first place. And then many are entirely untransparent. And so we don't really know. Some are more transparent than others, but some are very untransparent. And so we don't really know the basis on which the rankings is taking place. Probably the most problematic proxy measurement for quality that's used in a number of the rankings is so-called peer review or reputation surveys. And I know I get sent them all the time to fill in, and I'm sure many of you get sent them, where you get asked which is the main university in your field, which is the best university in your field. And on the slide you can see now I've put some universities that happen to all be in the UK, I think. Yes. And if I asked you, well, which of these is the best university in your field? I'm guessing, oh, Oxford. Okay, we've heard of Oxford. Okay, that's actually Oxford Brookes. But what else do we see here? University of Sussex. Yes, I've heard of them, so they must be good. But what is this other thing? Roehampton? No, I haven't heard of them, so I'll put them lower on the list. Is that telling you anything about the quality? When I haven't been to any of those universities, I haven't sat in their classes, I haven't collaborated with academics at those institutions. So are those reputation surveys really a measure of quality? I think I've already said that. This issue about them being unscientific is important for a number of reasons, one of which is that we're living in an era where more and more people are at best science skeptical and at worst actually anti-science. And I mean, what we see with Trump doing in the US, we see the rise of measles again, because we've been told, that you mustn't trust the science. And so in an era where universities are really having to negotiate in society to say, please do trust the experts. Please, we do have the best interests of the public at heart. Does it make sense for universities to be playing a game that is unscientific, to be participating in something that is simply not good science? So this is a real worry of mine, that in an era where people are turning against universities in much of the world, not yet, I must say, on much of the African continent, where a university qualification still carries a high graduate premium. But in much of the world, people are turning against universities and the intellectual pursuits that are housed in universities. Is it a good idea for us to be playing these games? Then, of course, the neo-colonial aspect. And I think someone said earlier, rankings says this is the model. And every university, regardless of its history, its space, its place, its vision, its mission, its resources, you should all be trying to get this particular set of numbers. Very important, it forces universities to focus on research, which is, that's my bread and butter. It's my love is research. So I'm all in favor of building research. But there may be other activities then that become undermined because they don't count. It's ahistorical, and that point was already made in the very first presentation. So it doesn't look at where our universities come from. It treats everyone as if we are working on the same ground. It privileges English language publications, English language teaching, and global North models in general. And what we are seeing now is that these industries are starting to prey on the global south as an emerging market. And so we are seeing the rise of rankings such as the Sub-Saharan African University rankings, the Emerging Economy University rankings. And I'm never quite sure whether to feel patronized by these, who say, oh, shame, we'll give you your own little rankings that you can do well in, or whether to be furious that they've either saturated the global north market or indeed are starting to lose ground in the global north market, and so are saying, hey, here's a new market for us to make a whole lot of money in. There are a number of universities, and this number is thankfully growing, that are either never timers, so right from the get-go they've said we will not participate in rankings, or they are what are known as defectors. So more recently we've had Yale Law School, Harvard Medical School, Harvard Law School, the Sorbonne, Utrecht say, no, sorry, we cannot participate in rankings. They are unscientific. They don't stand for the ethos that we believe in. And it's really important for those of us in the global south who perhaps could be accused of, well, of course you don't want to be in the rankings. Of course you said rankings are bad because you don't do well in them. So it's good for us that these big boys, if you like, are now saying, hey, this is not cool. This ranking thing is not good for the university system, because it makes it more possible for universities like my own, which is their Rhodes University, the only university on the African continent that has said we will not participate in global rankings because we believe that they are a neo-colonial and unscientific process. But one of the things that always worries me a little bit about when academics talk about rankings is the basic thing of follow the money. How do rankings make money? Surely we should be asking that. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and yet you can access the rankings for free. They get published for free. You can find them online for free. So how does it become a multi-billion-dollar industry? And you will have seen the recent mergers that have taken place. It's huge money. So where does the money come from if it doesn't come from rankings? And if we've just followed the money, then we start to see how, let's just say, dodgy the industry is. To some extent, they make money from events, and that's where it's just starting in the African continent. We're starting to see Times Higher Education fancy events taking place, which our vice chancellors will pay a lot of money to go to try and get the inside scoop on how to do well. They get a bit of money on advertising because when the rankings come out, people really want to make sure their adverts are on that particular news or web page. A lot of money from consultancies. And that is a growing industry of people who work for the rankings industries who will come and help your university do better in the rankings, and you will pay them dearly for that privilege. There are some which I think is really dodgy, like QS, where you can actually pay to get a gold star next to your name. And wherever you are in the rankings, you get a little gold star next to your name. All that means is that you've paid them. But those are actually fairly small amounts of money compared to the real money of where the multi-billion-dollar industry is. And that's from the data. And a number of people, and Usher is one, but Hazelhorn is another, have really said that rankings are just what do you call it? Smoke and mirrors, a cloak, a vehicle for getting data from universities, because in order to do well for universities, you hand over all your data to them. And there are increasing numbers of rankings and subsections of rankings that want more and more data. How many hours are your students spending on your online learning management system? What are your students' email addresses? How many of your staff are of which race groups, or where did they study? And we hand over that data, and that data, of course, in this day and age, data is worth more than gold, and it gets repackaged and sold to industries, to consultancies, to government. So really the money is in the data that we hand over for free in order to look good in this industry. So I'm finally, very belatedly, with 2 minutes left, getting to the real topic, which is what I'm currently researching, which is looking at how the rankings, in order to do well with the rankings, we are seeing universities play games. And I'm seeing that big time in South Africa. If you can't rewrite history, and we can't rewrite the colonial past and the current realities of how neocolonialism works, you can still do relatively well in the rankings if you are prepared to do certain things. So the big one that I'm looking at is ghost affiliations, which is where basically individual academics who are very prolific producers of outputs, of publications, will be approached by university management and say, hey, would you mind putting our institution as your affiliation, as a co-affiliation, or alternating it with the affiliation of the university where you actually work, so that we can claim your publications. It doesn't matter if your research has got nothing to do with what our university is interested in. It doesn't matter if you've never been to our university. It doesn't matter if you've never been to our country, because we can at least count you. So we are seeing a lot of ghost affiliations, and I'm afraid to say we're seeing a lot of that happening in South Africa. I will note that the particular institution that is worst at that in South Africa was not mentioned yet today, so that's good. Glad handing, which is where, in order to get academics around the world who get these surveys and get asked which is the best university in your field, you make sure that whenever you're sending academics to go to a conference, they must go up and glad hand and shake hands and introduce yourself to people. And so that's becoming almost an industry in itself, is to do kind of marketing within the industry, within higher education institutions and conferences and other events, to make sure that people remember your institution, so you get put on those surveys. You pay for consultancies, I've already said that, and of course we pay the industry in data. That's how we do well. We make sure we hand over that data. I think it's important, as I said, that we have data about our institutions, but to hand that over to a corrupt industry, I think is problematic. And then the main way to really do well, I can hear my alarm, so that means my time is up, is really just make sure that your staff just publish. Don't worry about the quality, don't worry about the impact. Just publish in English, in the Global North publications. As you can hear, I am very cynical, skeptical is perhaps a more polite way of saying it. I see websites like this in universities in South Africa. There's so many rankings and sub-rankings now. You just choose the one that makes your university look good, and you slap that on your web page. And as you can see from this slide, that is what we do in South Africa. So everyone claims the different rankings depending on whichever one you look best in. So I've run out of time, so I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much, Prof. I've picked a few things. Rankings are unscientific, arbitrary, and untransparent. Now, when Professor Oyewole was making his presentation, he had also alluded to the fact that the metrics are there, but they're not as straightforward as they appear on paper. So that will seem to corroborate what you have just said. The rankings are scientific, arbitrary, and untransparent. And for that reason, I believe that you strongly will agree with those who said they should not be ranking. Universities should focus on imparting on their community and the country where they are. And even to go beyond that, one will begin to ask, can one university really be on top in every field of study? Isn't it that universities have some areas where they are stronger than other areas? Because like in South Africa, you still see that apart from the general ranking, you still see rankings in specific fields of study. So when we have all these rankings that are cut across all the fields of study, does it mean that those universities placed on top are good in everything in the university? It's unthinkable that one university can really be all knowing all and everything in all the fields that we study in the universities. And when the rankings are made, what about universities that don't have certain courses in some areas? How are they also featured in the rankings? So obviously, when one says these rankings are arbitrary, there's every good reason to support that. So thank you, Prof, for your presentations. I know that we've had some write-ups from Bruce University where some academics are saying they're going to pull out of these rankings. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe Prof might be one of them. Thank you, Prof. So this is the time for questions and answers. Let me see how much time we have. We're already running behind schedule, but we'll try to look at the questions very quickly as they come. Some are sent to me on my WhatsApp, so I'll read them out, and the professors out there will help us to deal with them. The first question I have here is, what is the basic constitution of the ranking bodies? Who are the members? Yeah, Let me take this to Professor McKenna because of our critical approach to ranking. Prof, what do you say about that? What is the basic constitution of the ranking bodies? Who are the members?
They are owned by companies. A couple of big multinational companies owns like Times Higher Education. So the initial ranking. So if we look at where QS started, it started by academics in a university. If we look at even how Times Higher Education started, it started within the newspaper Times Higher Education, which was basically run by and for academics. But since then, that was a while ago, since then it is now multi-billion-dollar industry. So a multi-billion-dollar industry is, sad to say, never in the hands of academics. It's in the hands of its shareholders. So, if you want to find out more, you can literally go online and you can see who the CEOs are, how it runs, how it runs. Yeah, you can go online and see who is running these things, and many of them, not all of them, but are publicly listed, so you can even buy shares.
Thank you, Prof, for your response. There's a comment here, I think it's from Dr. Wells. He said, I have heard directly from academic institutions or from higher education institutions that have been approached to advertise on some higher education web platforms in return for featuring on ranking lists. I cannot confirm this is the case. I see. So Prof is saying that this will appear like some academic institutions seem to be doing something to ensure that they are ranked. Remember that during his presentation, he said we have more than 21,000 higher institutions in the world, and how will all of them feature in the ranking? So some seem to be lobbying to be ranked and something like that. That's the point he's making there. I don't know. Does any of the speakers want to comment on this? Professor Oyewole, you still there?
Yes, I'm there.
Yes, Prof. Do you confirm what Dr. Wells has said? That some institutions lobby to be ranked?
I do not have information about that, but I need to make this clear. One thing I think the issue is that the academic community do not really understand what is going on with these ranking organizations. When ranking comes out every year, as far as Africa is concerned, they are only concerned with about 25 to 35 universities in Africa out of the over 2,000 higher education institutions in Africa. The reason is clear. They do not have data about all the universities in Africa. They only have data about 35 universities, and they provide their rankings based on just information that they have on 35 universities. I think that this is not fair to the African university system. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. And I can also see a comment from Dr. Wells that I agree with Professor McKenna that there is a proliferation of other rankings to make sure that everyone gets ranked somehow, somewhere. Well, I know there's a lot of controversies on issue of ranking, obviously. I see vice chancellors, just like in the slides we have just seen from Professor McKenna's presentation, where you see some vice chancellors celebrating that they have been ranked as the first or the last, as the case may be. But on each case, the fact remains that there is no objective way of assessing what makes one to be placed at a particular point and the other one placed below that very point. Yes, Dr. Wells, I can see your hand is up. You want to make some comments?
Thank you, Anthony, and I'm sorry to take the floor one last time, I promise. But yes. I do think that I'll repeat what I said before. I think the whole ranking issue is a red herring, by which I mean it's not something that needs to be prioritized at all. I think it comes back down to, I would say, I would go as far as to say, ignore rankings. They are not important. What's important is for the institution to be something for somebody and the community they serve. You're fighting a losing battle if you're trying to get on some global list or even a continental list. If that happens, well, maybe it happens. But that's not the purpose of the vision and the mission of a higher education institution at the local level. I will leave it there at that. Thank you. Back.
Thank you, Dr. Wells. And as a follow-up to what Dr. Wells have said now, and I'm going to take this issue to Professor Johnson to address it. There is a question here that says, how can universities shift from a ranking system to more socially impactful measures? Socially impactful research is also context-specific and should be reflective of the realities of those who live and face those realities. Professor Johnson, are you still with us?
Yes, I am indeed. Thank you very much. That's great. Let me just lower my hand because I was going to try and I can't see where my hand is. Can't find my hand. I'm sure somebody will help me. But I was just in response to the last question going to say, the dilemma we have in respect of rankings, and really to talk about universities in my neck of the woods, is that many, not through their own fault, but many universities have become universities from being historically, for example, polytechnics who did a very, very good job across England, and they've been forced to shift their mission as a policy and political prerogative. The UK, England and Wales particularly, were doing far less well than their European counterparts in the numbers of students enrolled in higher education. And when one looks at the macroeconomic data, we call it educational attainment. That means how far do you get along this ladder of education and accreditation. If you look at South Korea, for example, many of its young people now have master's degrees or doctoral degrees, and concomitantly alongside that, there's been a very sharp increase in GDP. So macroeconomists have started already 15, 20 years ago to make this link between attainment, so going to not only primary but secondary school, into higher education, coming out with a undergraduate, graduate degree, a doctoral degree, and they've linked that very sharply to productivity and economic outcome. So in the UK, for example, polytechnics were persuaded, to use a lighter word in the sense, to become universities. And once they did, they had to abide by the same matrices. But then, people who attend, the so-called consumers or clients or learners or participants, whatever your preferred sort of frame of references, started to complain about certain universities. Some of them, the sort of, what we call red brick universities or older universities, and others, new universities, not actually delivering what they should be delivering, classes being too full, the curriculum being filled with nonsense subjects, vast sums of money, £9,000 a year being paid for a degree in, I won't name any of the trades or professions, but that people were beginning to see as pretty worthless, because it didn't translate into jobs or skills or anything. So the other side of that question, while I'm not a great, while I don't necessarily support the idea of rankings in their naked form, There are strong accountability questions that do need to be addressed. And certainly I work in a lot of African countries, in primary or secondary schools, and questions such as, do schools or the teachers in them or the head teachers in them, are they accountable to the learning that they do provide to learners? Those in rural areas, in poorer communities, and so on, are not well served. And so the idea of rankings also in the UK, at least, is drawn from school league tables. There are lots of statistical difficulties with these because they don't take into account, baselines or teacher effects, but these are kind of quite, almost unscientific rankings of schools in the order in which student scores have been calculated, or inspection reports and so on. So you've got top schools and bottom schools, and parents say, oh, well, if a school isn't serving my child's needs, I'll move them to another school. So the idea of social accountability by seeing data, and by seeing data that is published on a website. This is where your school is in relation to others. This is where your university or the university your kid attends is in relation to others. Satisfaction scores, scientific output, all of this. So there is a big accountability question, which I don't think we should ignore. Otherwise the debate is actually pretty one-sided.
Thank you, Prof. We already overshot our time. Let me just read out 2 comments here, and then I'll give the speakers 1 minute to round up, and we close the session. Yes, the first comment here is that I think Africa have carried this ranking to another level. From the presentations here, I have come to realize that this is a scary thing, especially the fact that your data are in the hands of strangers, and quality and scientific integrity is watered down. This seems to agree with what Professor McKenna has written here. She says, as if she's responding to this, she says, yes, it is a red herring. We need to build our university's ability to collect and analyze our own data. We need to set clear agendas for ourselves and the means of ascertaining how we are doing. This does not need to be parochial. It can be global impact. I think this seems to have responded to this comment here. So there's a lot of other questions which we cannot deal with here because of time. Now, as we are coming to the close of this webinar, let me give each presenter 1 minute to round up very quickly. So, yes,
Prof, can I say something?
Okay,
I think
please.
It's 2 o'clock. Please, I think they finished exactly on time because we wanted it to end by 1:15, and then we have 45 minutes for questions, so we have time.
Okay, because my own time here, I was seeing something like
No,
we're
right.
2 o'clock there.
Yeah,
It's all
it's
right.
until 12 o'clock, please.
It's all right. So it should be 3
All right,
o'clock on
thanks.
my side. Oh, that's all
yes,
right.
okay.
3
Okay,
o'clock
you're
on
on
my
the other
side.
side.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you so much. Okay, we still have some time, colleagues. Let me see if there are other comments.
Since you have time, can I make some interventions?
Beautiful, Prof. Yeah, you can.
Please, I do not want us to leave this webinar with an impression to say that ranking is bad. I also do not buy that idea to tell universities, say, ignore ranking. The real issue is this. Universities that are involved in ranking, there are some benefits that they are getting from it. Improved partnership. They are attracting funds more than universities that are not involved in ranking. Students' admission today in some areas is now based on the result of ranking. And I will say that, please, we should not tell universities that, please, ignore ranking. Are you asking us to say, continue with poor funding of your universities, continue with your low infrastructures, continue with your unmotivated salaries that cannot attract international researchers into your universities. I do not think that that's the message that we are passing out. We are not asking universities not to be competitive. Why should universities be afraid of being competitive? We should commit ourselves to excellence. But I also agree that is ranking a measure of quality? Yes, the answer is yes and no. Let me seize this opportunity to inform us that in Africa, we've developed the African rating mechanism that can help you to assess yourself, not because you want to compare yourself with some others. Despite the condemnations on ranking, I quite agree that now, especially in South Africa, issue about ghost affiliation, paying the industry because you want to be well ranked. We should condemn these negative practices, but that does not mean that universities should not strive for excellence or should not strive to be competitive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Yes, what you have said now re-echoes a comment I have here with me from one of the members in the audience. He says, African universities should not be afraid of competitiveness. Global competition takes place in football, general sports, human development index, the economy, etc. Let us learn from China, Singapore, and other competitive nations and universities. At the rate we are going, we may someday begin to campaign against Africa's involvement in Nobel and Fields Prizes nominations. Prof. McKenna, what do you say about this comment?
Yeah, I think we're conflating different issues and pretending they're the same one.
Yes.
We're talking about the rankings industry here. We're not talking about competitiveness. We're not talking about the importance of African universities taking their rightful place in the world. We're not talking about making an impact. We're talking about the way the rankings industry works. So what I often hear when I talk about these things is it's sort of you're arguing with the wrong thing because no, but I've yet to find a vice chancellor who will behind closed doors agree with rankings. When I go through the methods, they say, yeah, you're right. I say, so you would fail a student who came up with this methodology as a master's study. Yes, of course, it's bad methodology, it's bad research methods. Okay, so behind closed doors, you wouldn't agree. Yes, but but we have to do it. We have to play this game. There is no other way. And I don't buy that there is no alternative. I think that we need to hold on to and be much prouder of what we can be, what we should be, have bigger, bolder imaginations, put ourselves out there, build our research profiles. All of those things are so fundamental, and be competitive. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the specific multi-billion-dollar rankings industry and the very possibly unintended consequences that it has had. And I think it's important to note that. And I mean, I have a look at why does Germany and France do so badly on the rankings? They do so badly on the rankings because they have a far more egalitarian higher education system than many other countries in Europe, and because they have research institutes and they have teaching universities. So as a country, they don't do particularly well compared to other European countries. And yet I would doubt that anyone in this group would say, oh, France has got bad higher education, Germany's got bad higher education. I believe that they have some of the best universities in the world, but they don't do well in that particular system because the methodology is flawed. So I just want to be clear that I think it would be a mistake to say that being very critical of the multi-billion-dollar rankings industries and its negative consequences for higher education institutions is the same thing as saying, oh, we must accept the status quo and we don't want to be competitive. Those are very different things.
Thank you, Prof. Yes, I can also see a comment here where one of the members in the audience has said, it is misleading to create the impression that universities are not ranked in subject areas. Prof. Mwafo, needs to correct that impression. Certainly, I'm not saying universities are not ranked in subject areas. They are ranked. But when you look at the world university rankings, the general rankings is the universities that are ranked, not really the subject areas. When you come down to the specific rankings, like in South Africa, you see, they will tell you if you want to study health sciences, this is the best university, this other one is the second, and all that. They're ranked in subject areas, but at the general level, you see that it is this big university followed by the big, and every year the same universities keep topping the chart, and those at the bottom remain at the bottom. And this takes me to, let me ask Professor Yewole one little question, Prof. As a professor of, as a vice chancellor or former vice chancellor of a university in Nigeria, Nigerian universities don't seem to feature favorably in most of these rankings. What could be the problem, Prof? From your own experience as a former vice chancellor?
From my experience, the funding of universities in Nigeria is not competitive. From my experience too, our infrastructures cannot deliver quality research that can make great impacts, world impacts that we expect. From my experience too, I think that our researchers in Nigeria are highly underpaid to the extent that they cannot be competitive with other researchers. That does not mean that we lack talent in Africa. I think that we need to put more money into research. We should not do research just like we are doing in Nigeria. Many of our researchers until recently are funded from the north. Let our country be able to put money to research for our development. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I hope the government is hearing you. I hope the Minister of Education and others are hearing this, because there are more than 200 universities in Nigeria, getting to 300, but you only find about one or two of them in the top 10. And it's mostly one of the private universities and two or three of the old generation universities. The others don't feature anywhere, but South Africa has about 27 universities or thereabout. Always have about 10 of them feature in the top African university ranking. So Nigerian government needs to do something. I hope they're hearing what you have just said, at least as a former vice chancellor of one of the universities in Nigeria. Thank you, Prof. Let me see if I have another comment here that we're going to look at. It is certainly much more important to capitalize on ranking methodologies to fulfill real reforms of its genuine portfolio of research through using local African evidence to finding new answering existing highly controversial and pressing research questions, and or more importantly, to pose new globally progressive research questions. I'm not too sure I understand this write-up. It is certainly much more important to capitalize on ranking methodologies to fulfill real reforms of its genuine portfolio of research through using local African evidence to finding new answering existing highly controversial pressing research questions, and or more importantly, to pose new globally progressive research questions. I think the commentator is basically saying we should Africanize our own metrics of ranking. It shouldn't be what those at the higher level tell us always that we should accept. Yes, but we also have African university rankings and we have world university rankings. So when we look at them, either way, you discover that even in Africa, the same universities continue to feature at the top. The other ones are not featuring. So what's the problem? Yes, I can see a hand from Emmanuel. Emmanuel, can you hear me? Emmanuel Bernard, can you unmute your mic? Yes. You can talk. We'll hear you. Okay. Emmanuel Bernard, we're not hearing your voice. We could see your hand is up. Okay. Probably you are in a network challenged location.
I don't know. Could that possibly be me?
Okay, it could be you. Okay, if your hand is up, Namdi.
Right, because I just got notification to be unmuted. Yes, that's right. Yeah, Nnamdi Madike. Well,
Okay.
I'm joining in from Hyderabad in India. Um, Two quick comments as far as university rankings go. I think it's the same thing that's happened to the ratings agencies, where we talk about how Standard and Poor rates even countries and et cetera, for investment purposes. Another, we have not learned from that lesson, have we? So the second one has to do with the rankings of the World Bank, the Doing Business report rankings that ended in 2018 due to game playing that has been discussed repeatedly on this platform. We've not learned anything from there, have we? And finally, in terms of competitiveness of Nigerian universities, I think one thing is the D word. It's very simple. It's diaspora connect. It's collaborative engagement in research. That's what makes things happen. I publish papers with colleagues in Nigerian universities. And I think if you check their profiles globally, especially on Google, how many Nigerian academics actually have a digital footprints? How many are on Google Scholar? I think some of my colleagues, even here at my current institution, tell you that they are forced to publish in local unknown journals as part of the promotions procedure and not something that is widely and globally accessible, so to speak. So I think we're a victim of our own circumstances or our own doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Namdi. We had your comments. Let me also take this comment. Yeah, it says, "Thank you." Okay, let me see. This is a question. Why is teaching effectiveness not one of the measures for university ranking? Professor McKenna, do you have a response to this? Why is teaching effectiveness not one of the measures for university ranking?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the problem, of course, is that rankings work on metrification. You take a complex social phenomenon and you turn it into a simple number. And to take any complex social phenomenon and turn it into a simple number, you've got to use a proxy. And that proxy is not always very representative of the social phenomenon it purports to represent. And so that's why with research, we look at publications, and then you might say, well, impact, how do we measure impact? Okay, we'll look at citations, but maybe there's a publication that's actually changed practice in a way that doesn't, easily get counted. So this is always the problem. And teaching is much harder than research because we don't have very clear numbers. So those rankings that do look at teaching quality, and by the way, many do not look at it at all. All of them privilege research. Some of them only look at research. But those few that do look at teaching, they can't measure teaching because they can't sit in every lecturer's class and ascertain what the quality is. They can't write every assessment and ascertain what the quality is. So they have to use proxies. And the proxies that are used for teaching quality include things like teacher to student ratio. So how many staff members do we have per students? And that is often gamed by including someone who just came and gave one guest lecture and you include them in your stats as staff members. So that's gamed in interesting ways. Another proxy measure for quality is the peer reviews, the reputation surveys, is you ask all the academics in your field which university is the best. And that's as I said, it's reputation. It tells you nothing about teaching quality. Most of the people who fill in those surveys have never sat in a class. But that particular indicator is often counted as teaching quality. And the other big one that's often used, that is sometimes used as teaching quality, is rejection rate. So if you can show that you've had 10,000 applications and you can only accept 50, you'll get much more points for your ranking than if you can show you've got 1,000 students and you accepted 900 of them. And the game playing around that we've seen is that a number of institutions now use clearinghouses, so central applications places. So you can say, well, actually, we did have 10,000 applications and we only accepted 900. But of course, actually, those 10,000 applications were going to the central clearinghouse and applying for 20 universities. So we've seen that game playing happening. The final one that we sometimes see as a proxy for teaching quality is the quality of your students. And in America, in the American ranking systems, that's often used is the SAT scores. So if you can say, well, our students have much higher SAT scores, that somehow is meant to show that you have better quality, but really it shows that you're a more elite institution. And we have game playing there where we've had some institutions that will pay for the students who are already enrolled and busy doing their first year to retake their SAT scores. Because I don't know if you know the American system, but if you retake your SAT scores, if you get a higher score, it replaces your previous lower score. And so when it comes time for that university to hand over its data to the rankings industry, it's able to say, look, our students have done, SAT scores are much higher, but actually many of them have rewritten their SAT scores after they were registered. So that's one of the game playing. But because the industry makes its money from collecting data, it's not in their interest to ban universities that behave in these illegal or unethical ways, because they want the universities to stay there. They know that the rankings are a nonsense, but they make their money from collecting the data. So what they've done is they've sometimes banned these universities that have been found guilty of these practices. They've banned them for 1 year. In the worst case, they ban them for 2 years, because it's really not in the universities, in the rankings industry's interest to get rid of unscrupulous institutions.
Thank you, Prof. Let me follow up on this question. In some universities in Africa, in some parts of Africa, in recent times, you discover very large number of first-class graduates from the universities. Each year, you see the university churning out quite a large number of first-class graduates. Is it a reflection of the effectiveness of teaching in such universities? Professor Oyewole, do you have something to say on this?
No, I don't think there is a reflection of the effectiveness of teaching. It's more connected with the system of grading in those universities. When you look at many of these universities churning out large numbers of first class, a student can fail a course. If that student repeats that course, they will cancel the grades and marks for the first failure and reflect the new grades. This does not happen in other conventional universities. The rating for that first failure will still be counted against you. I think that is the method, the system that is being employed. And private universities make use of this because they are private entities who want to look good to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. No, it's good you said this, because I've also been in some parts of Africa in my academic journey where the administrators of the institution had come to tell us that, please, you should not fail our students. Don't fail our students. The government is spending so much money to train these students, that they will learn as they grow up. So it's covered that you mark your scripts, and it's got so many of them have failed, but somehow, because of the system, the way the system works, you will not give them failed mark. You just allow them to keep moving. So it doesn't really reflect the effectiveness of teaching as it were. So it might not be a very good parameter for ranking, as Prof. McKenna had pointed out. Let me see if there are other good comments that we should also look at before we round up. Yes, anybody on the audience who has anything to say, you can raise your hand. We'll recognize you and ask your question. Yes, Akanji, you want to ask question or comment? Yes, Akanji. After Akanji, then I can talk to Afolabi. Akanji first. Akanji, unmute your mic and speak. Okay, I can see that Afolabi has unmuted his mic. So Afolabi, you can go on. Speak.
Yeah, good evening, Nigerian time to everybody.
Thank you.
I really enjoy this talk so much, and I believe we are going to have the what they call it, the PowerPoint thereafter. My point is this: Professor Afolabi Stephen from Kwara State University, Malete, Nigeria. I was the one who had the question on teaching effectiveness, and it was really trust. I like the argument, I like the discussion. However, the second one that I want to ask is on community service. Thank God, Professor McKenna talked about community service. The reason why he said ranking is unscientific. that we can, when we want to talk of ranking, we can talk of community service too, because so how can ranking also capture community service? Because that's like my university is university established for agriculture, grain and community service. So how can we capture community service? And that is impactful. It makes university to be impactful to the community that it serves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Afolabi or Professor Olufemi. Thank you so much. Yes, the other hand has gone down now. Now I can see a comment here. It says, this is what we are saying, Prof. Olushola. Some people carry out research from improvised methodology due to lack of adequate facility, but we claim it was done using standard procedures. This is done in order to get ranked after publishing in high impact journals. Well, obviously, some people want to cheat the system and they can do so. Just like now in the age of AI, you see, we have a lot of issues with AI. People go to AI and download all sorts of things. I'm sure some of us who are still actively in the system would have witnessed that sometimes you give your students simple assignments. They are returning the work to you with downloaded information from AI. We have said it's not like AI is wrong. It's a very good piece of platform for getting information. But when such information is gotten, it has to be adapted to fit the purpose for which it's going to be used. You don't just go there and lift what is there and then send it back to the lecturer. So that's just it. Professor Olushola, you had this comment that some people use improvised methodology due to lack of adequate facility. I know you've talked about funding in the Nigerian universities. The research is not properly funded. And so people try as much as they can because they can't remain dormant. Like we say in the academic environment that is either you publish or you perish. And so nobody wants to perish. So they have to do whatever they can to make sure that they remain active within the system. Prof. Olushola, Prof. Oyewole, do you want to say something on that?
I will say that is fraud.
Yes.
We should not encourage fraud with the intention that we want to promote development. I think that something is basically wrong with our African system. Quite often in Africa, we do research not because we want to promote development or want to solve problems. We do research because we want to be upgraded in our academic ranking. You want to become a professor, that's why you are publishing. That's a wrong purpose. I think it's high time we change our purpose of research in Africa. But before I leave that, since this occasion is celebrating a publication organization, the visibility of African journals is very important. Many of us publish in African journals. Unfortunately, there still needs to improve the quality of many journals in Africa so that they can be visible beyond Africa. If we improve the quality of African journals, it will help to promote African research scholars' work and it will promote visibility. And let me also say that we appear to be concentrating more on this world ranking system. What of national ranking? Can this help us to improve our infrastructures? Can our national ranking help to improve the status, the remuneration of our researchers? Can it help to improve the quality of our teaching in our universities? There is nothing wrong in our development of national ranking. You can even do ranking within your own university without depending on outsiders. I think these are things that I can do to motivate your productivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Oyewole. Yes, and that takes me to the next question here, and I'm going to take it to Professor McKenna. It says, why don't we focus on developing a clear method of ranking for African universities, rather than play in the existing ranking systems with very unclear metrics? A lot of time, Africa is late to the party, and instead of imagining the system to be clear, we just pile into what is existing, even with unclear factors. Prof. McKenna, what do you say on this?
Yeah, look, for me, the basic notion of composite measuring, arbitrary weighting, proxy measures that are too far from the social phenomenon that they are purport to represent mean that most of these kinds of rankings are going to be problematic. So even the SDG rankings that we see is problematic from that perspective. Much better than the other rankings because it's transparent, and because it still is trying to build a very particular, more individual identity rather than this homogenizing sort of elite research institution. So you get better kinds of rankings, but I would suggest that what we have to get much better at, and I want to pick up on Professor Olasola's point, what we have to get better at is making clear what we are doing, getting that out there, showing that we are and making that something that we all strive towards. So what is my university? What does it stand for? What is it trying to do? And where do I see that? What evidence is there that this is happening? You know, if we say, well, we're a community engaged research institution that is of its regional area, okay, fine, that's your identity. Well, what does that look like? How do you see that? How do you measure it, if you like? How do you weigh it? How do you make sure that the rest of the world knows about it? Because without that, we are either all going to play ridiculous games of this international rankings industry, or we all just sit around on our hands and do very little and say, oh, well, you know, what can we do? It's unfair and there's nothing we can do. So for me, yeah, sure. If you can come up with a strong means of developing a national rankings. I must say everything that I've ever researched on the way in which university rankings have been done suggests otherwise, but I have seen very good examples, and actually a couple of them are from India, and I know we had a speaker from India earlier, very good examples of universities that have been able to articulate at a national and even global level who they are, what they stand for, and where their enormous successes have been. And if we can get that right, then we really can have an impact.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Let me read out what seems to be like an agreement or commendation for Professor Olushola here. One commentator says, I strongly agree with Professor Olushola. The other one says, Professor Oyewole is a realistic person with a growth mind. He is not afraid of competition and innovation. Prof, I'm sure you'll be happy with this comment, but I hope that those you are talking to are hearing your voice, because it's the government. They should fund the universities. That's all you say. The talents are there, the skills are there, like it's been observed in the presentations, but what about the funding? Some Nigerian academics cannot even go outside Nigeria to attend international conferences because the universities cannot provide them the funding. So that's what we're talking about. And you have made that very point loud and clear. And I hope they are hearing you. Thank you. Then the other person say, my hand has been up for some time, yet it is not recognized. No, I can't see any hand from my side here that is up. So if you are not recognized, it's because, okay, I can see the host wants to say something. Prof. Adibe.
Not really. I just wanted to draw attention to the person that has been raising his hand. I think it's Sidon. So if you can,
Sidon,
and then maybe at the end I have something to say.
Okay, it's all right. Okay, Sidon Adenoba, can you unmute your mic? Can you unmute your mic and speak? Your mic is muted. Adenoba, your mic is muted.
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
yeah, hello.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Now?
We can talk.
Oh,
yes,
great.
We can hear
Thanks.
you.
Yeah, please, I want to raise the question of politicization by the government of various Nigerian higher institutions. Most state governments and even the federal government have refused to fund their universities, as has been pointed out here several times. Yet, they go on creating more and more universities.
We're hearing you. I think you are in a network challenged location, but we got you. That issue of proliferation of universities in Nigeria is what we're talking about. Universities are ill-funded, and
like
more of them are okay.
More, and so on and so forth. So many universities proliferation and yet extremely poor funding.
That's all right. Thank you, Mr. Adenoba. We heard your voice. You can lower your hand now. Issue of proliferation of universities in Nigeria. I'm sure Professor Oyewole will take it to them and tell them that people are concerned about this proliferation of universities in Nigeria. Let us have quality and not quantity. Yes, because what we seem to be having now is quantity and not quality. So Prof will listen to you, and I'm sure he's going to take your observations to the right departments in Nigeria. Yes, Professor Adibe, you want to say something now before we quickly round up? Professor Adibe, unmute your mic. Unmute your mic.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us and honoring our invitation. We are very, very grateful to all of you, all of the participants, Professor Oyewole, Professor David, Dr. Wells, Stu McKenna, and all the others. We're really grateful. I just want to say one thing about ranking. And as Professor Nwafo mentioned, last year we did a similar webinar on bibliometric economy, that is that ranking of journals. So it's a relationship between what we did last year and what we're doing now. And our little experience from ranking it seems to be like chicken and egg thing. If you don't get ranked, we publish academic journals. This is our 23rd year, and this year we're publishing 40. When you have Scopus journals or Web of Science, it confers some kind of credibility. Some people have also criticized that as very neo-colonial. But if you don't have those kind of journals, you don't get high-quality contributors coming to your papers. Is it easy to get them? Some people would that is where people would start arguing whether African institutions are disadvantaged. Right now, we have 9 Scopus journals, and I think only 9, we probably rank among the top, if not the top. How does it work? If you submit one and you fail, and it is not accepted, you're quarantined for between 1 to 5 years. And we have had situations, journals we submit, they reject it and quarantine us for 5 years. We resubmit after 5 years, they quarantine you for another 3 years. You resubmit after that 3 years, they quarantine you again another 3 years. But then on the other hand, as you're getting frustrated and wanting to question whether the criteria and metrics of choosing are fair to you, suddenly also we got journals that have been ranked Q1, which is the top, meaning that they are the top 25% in their categories. And we've got journals that are ranked by Shimago, Q, which means they are regarded as top journals. In other words, if we bring it down to the university level, the issue of academic ranking, it's still going to be, if you get ranked, there are, as Professor Yowolo will say, if you don't get ranked, there are also consequences. But what we have then to argue in my own opposition, to look at, are there issues of context? Are there that we not look at the you have some still like all global standards, and that we all should aspire to global standards. But how can these ranking bodies take cognizance of unique circumstances, unique environments, without compromising the integrity of the metrics in which they use as in those rankings. These will be my general question to maybe all the panelists, if they use half a second to maybe throw light, because we are in the same business. Sometimes you get angry and say, why do I really have to care? But if you're not there by Scopus, you're not there in IBSS. In South Africa, for example, we've progressively increased the number of journals that are accredited by DOHET, the regulator of higher education in South Africa. This year, it got up to 20. And then you see South African academics coming into that journal. And when they come in, they bring in often the quality increases. We have then South Africa, North Africa, and that again places you in a position that when you resubmit to Scopus, you have better chances of success. So that's why I say it's like a chicken and egg argument. If you get ranked, it pays. But then there are things that are drawback to your ranking. How do we address that in Africa? Thank you very much, all of you, for participating.
Thank you, Professor Adibe. Let me give the speakers one minute to respond to the questions, even though some of them are rhetoric in nature. But let them just deliver their final closing remarks before we leave the session. So we start with Professor Oyewole. 1 minute, Prof.
Back is to challenge universities in Africa. Know who you are and what you stand for. Be sure that your vision and mission are being fulfilled. When you do that, be satisfied. But in doing this, the university should be concerned about quality. We should promote excellence. And please, when you do your research or you impact your communities and what you are doing is not known inside your community, you are not doing anything. Visibility is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Professor Johnson, please. You're still here. Thank you, Prof. 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Yes, again, I have to agree with Professor Aliwali, and would simply say that I think universities know how to address different audiences, and they do that well. So if they want to speak to their students and say we are a trustworthy place, we offer good quality teaching, we have good doctoral completion rates. You start here, you will finish in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. You can see our record. They know how to speak to funders because they say, this is our research profiles. Here are projects we have done. Here are our outputs for these projects. We deal with projects from start to finish, on time, and so on. If they want to talk to parents and say, we're a happy place. Students love coming here. They have a good time. So we don't really, I think it's a little bit of a red herring that we're somehow fearful of rankings. People who read these rankings read them for their own purposes, but universities also have their own voice and their own abilities to project themselves in a trustworthy way with verifiable data about what it is they do and do well. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Professor McKenna, I understand Dr. Wells has he sent an apology. He's gone to another meeting. So, Professor McKenna, can you give us also your final remark? 1 minute.
I can just draw on the previous two speakers. Who are we? Do we spend time in our universities thinking about who we are, what we value, what we think excellence looks like, and then setting up our structures and procedures and ways of weighing up our activities to ensure that we actually achieve what we think we should be? I worry that actually universities spend a lot of time in meetings and committees and hierarchies and spend a lot of time calling each other professor this, professor that, and not actually having conversations about who are we, what do we value, what do we stand for, and then making that clear to our funders, to our students, to the parents, to our communities. And if we really do that well, then we will achieve excellence.
Thank you, Prof. Yes, I think we're coming to the closing sessions of this program for today. The people in the audience, unfortunately, we cannot get at all of you. Some of you have raised very good questions, and we'll continue to go through them. If we find some that are very cogent and need response, we can send them to one of the speakers to respond to it. Thank you so much for finding time to attend this seminar, and sorry for the little time. We've gone 10 minutes beyond the stipulated time. It's still manageable. Thank you. At least last year, most of you were here, and this year you are here again. I think we are learning on these ranking issues, and it's continued to be issue we're going to be discussing in our institutions, because some agree, some don't agree, and that is the nature of our job. Thank you, the host, for bringing us together here again. Now I hand the platform back to the host to render the closing remarks, and we'll come to the end. Thank you.
And once again, I want to express our appreciation for people who made out time to be part of this session. We are very grateful, and we're not taking it for granted. And we hope that when we do this next time again, that we'll continue to contribute in advancing the frontiers of knowledge in the continent and beyond. Thank you very much, and have a nice trip back to your destinations.